everyone. My name's Duncan White. I'm the managing editor of the International Fire and Safety Journal, and I'm delighted on today's Leader in Fire and Safety podcast to be joined by Ben Wolfe and Mark Hunter from Honeywell. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Excellent. It's great to have you both with me today, and I'm really looking forward to learning lots about this great new system, and even more delighted to have the co-inventor with me. So Ben, I'm really looking forward to picking your brains. But before we go any further, tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm coming to you first, Ben.
Okay, so I've worked in fire now for 11 or 12 years, I think, and my job is kind of product innovation, product development. So I spend a lot of time with our customers. I understand their pain points. I think things occur to you. You see people going around with gas poles testing fire detectors. And about 6 years ago, I'm very close with the engineers that I work with here in the UK. And it was one of those coffee machine conversations where we were talking about a particular innovation that one of the other co-inventors, Mike Barson, had come up with. It was a great idea, but it was going to sell precisely 0 of them. But actually, emanating from that idea was the ability of having the degree of sensitivity that effectively it was aware that it functioned or not. And I was like, ooh, hang on, let's just cotton on to that bit. And then out of that conversation, one thing led to another. We managed to hijack the vice president of fire at the time when he came for a site visit, presented this idea to them. We got some funding pretty much instantly to build a proof of concept, worked with some good partners, and came up with the idea of the self-test module to go inside the detector, and the rest, as they say, is history. And 6 years down the line from kind of having worked on developing this innovation to actually seeing it being installed, working really nicely, making buildings significantly safer has been probably the most satisfying period of my career, I'd say.
And quite right too. And I'm going to not miss this opportunity to get a lot more out of you during this next 20 minutes or so. Mark, coming to you, tell us a little bit more about Mark Hunter and your role with Honeywell.
I started pretty much traditional. Started off, I was trained as an estimator for a big multinational in my 20s, and then just progressively moved through to product sales, selling audiovisual in another company, and then joining Honeywell. And I think from my point of view, I fell into, I guess, become a bit of an expert. I don't know if in terms of self-test and how to position in the market, but I just love technology, absolutely love technology. So I'm in my element at the moment. We've got a cloud-based solution and an actual product that work perfectly together. So yeah, I've kind of fallen into the mindset of this is what the market wants and going out there and getting on with it, basically.
Well, and you've got to go out there and get on with it. It's the whole reason for change and innovation is having people behind the scenes that can bring the thoughts, the ideas into reality, and then the people that are going to go out there and get on with it. Today's podcast is great in terms of that I very rarely have the opportunity to talk to the actual person that came up with the idea and the conception, and especially now we're 6 years down the line and the product's actually out there doing exactly what it's intended to. So Ben, we've talked about, and you told us a little bit how the idea came to life. Give us a little bit more of an explanation of the self-test system from Honeywell and how it really went on that journey from that initial design thought right the way through to where we are today.
So yeah, as I kind of explained, it was initially observing that this could be a great potential solution. Then it was, as I said, it was just an incidental conversation. But in terms of kind of key breakthrough moments, I suggest. It was there was myself, Mike Barrs, and Chris Dearden, and we were experimenting literally with e-cigarettes. So we deconstructed e-cigarettes, and we were making big plumes of smoke across the smoke chamber and checking smoke responses. And I guess that was one of the moments where you go, "Ooh, we're onto something here." We didn't remain with the e-liquids, and we don't have kind of cherry flavoured self-test smoke detector vape flavors in multiple different multiple different flavors, but we do have moved to actually moving to refined paraffin wax. So instead of burning liquid, which is difficult to transport, we then actually moved away from that concept and moved further towards wax for a couple of different perspectives. Is that it had a good congealing point, so in terms of where it starts to transform from being a solid state wax into a gas, and equally it was much easier in terms of transportation. We didn't have to solve the issue of evaporating liquids over time, and it's something that was pretty stable. And actually the quantity of wax that we place on the self-test module is very, very small. It's you don't have to burn a lot of it, and that's one of the other aspects of the design which I really like. I mean, Mark will tell you, having being time served in the fire industry, is that when you're testing with smoke poles, you're producing big plumes of smoke that go into this chamber, and actually it has an adverse effect of actually creating small films on the optical LED, which potentially has the impact of actually reducing the output of the scatter path. So it can actually interfere with the bit where you're testing it, has the capacity, not always, depends on the environment, has the capacity to kind of interfere with the integrity of the detector. But because we're doing the test within the chamber, it's a very confined space, we can use very small quantities of the smoke. And equally, we discovered that we can solve the other big industry issue, because we're generating the smoke from the inside and then using an internal fan to push the smoke outside of the smoke inlets. We can consequently have a very simple algorithm, which is obscuration or quantity of smoke over time, and prove that the smoke entry points are clear. And that is, as Mark will attest to, is a huge industry issue where we know there have been fires as a consequence of these detectors being covered, and we can now find that out with a huge degree of certainty, whether everything in the system, no matter where they are on the system, often they're missed in things like voids and difficult to reach areas, we can prove that they're not covered. And actually, Mark's had some very, very good results, I would say, in terms of applications with student halls of residence and other places where he's had significant traction, where we've discovered that people are very interested in checking more regularly for making sure that these things aren't covered. There was an interesting story, because I launched this in the States a couple of years ago, and I was at Stanford University in California, and they were telling me about a university there where in the halls of residence, the students have been placing smooth peanut butter inside the smoke inlets. So when the technician came into the room to investigate the detector, and they sometimes test with the magnet out there, so they weren't testing the smoke inlets at all. They could not see that it was covered. Consequently, subsequently there was a fire. They did a really thorough investigation, and they've been realising that they've been covering these detectors up with smooth peanut butter so they could burn their joss sticks or whatever they do in Californian dorm rooms. So it's an issue, and it can lead to fires. So we've managed to solve that as well.
Well, and like you say, there's always going to be people that think they can get around a system. But what you've created there in terms of the ability for the self-test using that very small amount of substance, and also the checking for the blockages. This must have a huge impact on the testing times compared to the old system.
Mark, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I mean, I can cover that. I think where the savings come in is mainly around the disruption factor. So if you look at generally the building's operation, and we can use examples like hospitals, hotels, any sort of hospitality type event, you often have really challenging access issues in those kind of applications. And so whilst, yes, the process is quicker, we're kind of trying to put across the point, actually, it's more about the efficiencies that come with it. So, yes, there is some time saving, but actually, why not twist it on its head and say an engineer that spends an average of 1 to 2 minutes standing under a detector putting aerosol into it, that engineer is walking around with his phone now, and basically that engineer can spend more time looking at the compliance of the system rather than just standing there testing a device. Yeah. So I'd say it's more disruption and efficiency is the time-saving element. And to the end user, it's a huge benefit, and we see this day in, day out at the moment.
Mark's hit the nail on the head there, actually. What you'll find is from the testing engineer is that the focus has completely changed away from functional test to actually compliance. In terms of testing a singular smoke head, it doesn't take that long. But in terms of going back to the point you made, Duncan, around time savings, it's not about testing that singular detector, which is easy to access. There are multiple areas of buildings, including in voids, including in the top of lift shafts, including in locked rooms. Any fire engineer will attest to the fact that they're constantly going up and down like a yo-yo to reception, or the security guy to be able to get hold of keys to get access to different areas, not able to get access, having to put that into report, and having this compounded issue of not just the ones which are easy to access, but getting to the tricky ones. On average, in a kind of average building, and it does vary from an open office to a very complex building like a hospital potentially. On average, a fire engineer will test around about 100 odd devices a day. With the visual inspection, with self-test, where you can actually functionally test the largest building in the planet in under an hour. So that's the functional test. But in terms of the visual inspection, you don't have to get access to the rooms. I mean, the room I'm sat in now, there is a glass door, and I've got a detector above my head. If a fire engineer walked past, they've just got to glance up. They can see that it's fully compliant and okay, and they can tick it off as they go along. So in terms of that, that capacity for it to be significantly faster, we've got in the region of about 80% efficiencies based on our time in motion studies. So that's a difference between, instead of being on site for 5 days, you're on site for a day. So it doesn't play around the edges. It's transformational in terms of the amount of time that you're on site. But the critical thing, as Mark is rightly points out, is that the whole focus has moved away from the functional test, and it's to ensuring that compliance, that there's correct detector spacing, that it's fixed correctly, that it's the right kind of detector technology, and equally checking that the label of it is good or bad is something that doesn't necessarily happen in testing today. So there's some good additions there in terms of its overall capability.
It's also worth just quickly pointing out that if you take there's so many buildings around the UK where out-of-hours testing has to be done. Mm-hmm. This totally mitigates on quite a high proportion of them that out-of-hours testing is a thing of the past if you deploy this technology. Yeah, it's as simple as.
We can say the site where Honeywell Fire's based in the UK in Leicester, there are no in-day testing because people are using the building, so it's not allowed. So consequently, you've got to come either very early in the morning or an evening or a weekend, in which case they've got to pay double time and a half for people to be able to attend the building. If you're working in heating and ventilation, for instance, you're generally covered in oil and in a basement somewhere fixing the boiler or whatever it is that you're doing, and nobody cares. Fire's got a very distinct difference is that every single detector is in every single room of the building, and it doesn't care how sensitive or secure or difficult to access that building is. You've got to get in there. So effectively, you've got a fire engineer with a laptop, a phone, a smoke stick, a heating stick, a pair of ladders, clobbering all over the building, and having to get access to everywhere, irrespective of whether they want to be disturbed or not. This is, as Mark pointed out earlier, it's a lot more subtle and it's far less intrusive to a building. People don't want to be disturbed in their buildings. That's something that we've learned very, very clearly from end users, who are the people we're talking to about investing in this. In fact, very few building owners and end users aren't invested in the idea of self-test for the purposes of it. It just removes that degree of intrusion into a building, which is hand in hand with manual testing with fireballs. It's you can't get around it. You have to get in every room.
And from the ability to provide evidence in terms of undertaking those tests by having a system that is totally automated, that records exactly the time, the date, and the result, gives you that additional level of assurance that you are showing due diligence to the system and the integrity that you've got there, and like you say, not being intrusive and stopping the building from doing what it's designed to do, and be occupied and make money on most of the occasions.
If you talk to most end users, their number one priority is compliance.
Yeah.
And in many respects, what we're doing is we're offering compliance plus is a terminology we're using, but there is no other solution on the market where you can guarantee 100% functional testing. Now, of course, there's a lot of people that will argue back, well, you have to visually inspect the detector, but I'll give you a quick scenario. The hospital trusts and large end users we've been speaking to, they are much happier to be assured that 100% of their detectors are working regardless of whether they've been seen or not. That's a massive, massive benefit to them.
Yes, it's absolutely huge. I mean, a building owner, and you can see them visibly change in terms of the reaction around compliance, because they're in the dock if there's an issue. So they're absolutely invested in making sure that their compliance around fire standards are adhered to. It really means something to them, because if they're not doing the right thing, not doing due diligence, then yes, as I said, they can end up in the dock. But as Mark's said, when you get this in front of an end user in terms of the compliance position of this, if you've got a self-test detector, you know that it A, functionally works, and B, it's not covered. Those are the two huge parts of it. And in terms of the visual inspection, we can prove that because what we do is we have a Bluetooth capability within. It's a Bluetooth beacon. It's not like pairing with your headphones. It's just a beacon which sends all the information down to the fire engineer, including the device number, the zone description, device label, gives you all the information about that detector. And they can see just by stood underneath it, or even looking through a room at it, that it's the correct detector and it's labelled correctly. So, consequently, they can be reassured about everything about that detector that it is as it should be. So from a building owner's perspective, from the compliance perspective, they know they're getting the most thorough job done when they've invested in self-test. And that's why Mark has been as successful as he has when he's been taking this to some really key places. I mean, I don't know if you can share some of those places, Mark, more broadly, but we've been getting some really nice responses from specific areas that have those specific concerns, haven't they?
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether we should name drop, but we can certainly say there's been some very prestigious hotels. It's getting, one particular, I'll give you a very interesting analogy. I mean, when we started to talk to one of London's finest hotels, we actually got invited to talk to them directly. The problem at the moment is nobody has ever had another option but to have somebody walk around a building manually testing smoke detectors. So when you give an end user an option that can change, and let's be honest, guests don't want to be disturbed in an ideal world. And that's kind of applicable in most hotels, but the slightly higher end ones particularly, it's all about discretion. That's how they run their operation. So effectively, if you can offer a solution where anybody in that hotel, whether they're a guest or staff, whatever, see is somebody walking around doing everything on their phone, that's a win-win for them as an end user. And there's really nothing not to like about that offering, which is why that's a very successful area, as you can imagine, where we're getting some really good wins. But hospitals are the same, yeah.
Exactly, and like you say, it's having that system that is totally unobtrusive. It carries out its day-to-day function of sitting there quite quietly and just monitoring, and they only want it to go off when there is a real need for it. And having done 30 plus years as a fire officer and spent far too many hours stood in lobbies looking at fire panels and trying to work out where the unwanted signal was coming from, I think this system that provides a solution to unwanted alarms, as well as ensuring the alarms functioning properly, is a real plus. So, in terms of you taking it to the market in the real world, and you've told us about the high-end hotel, is the response across the board being the same, that people think that it's the best thing since sliced bread?
Yeah, I'd say that it's been extremely well received. And again, it comes down to there's never been an alternative. So we're giving a very smart alternative. But also, if you take the basics that generally people are, or businesses are, investing in smart solutions. They want everything to be as automated as possible. On another hand, you've got a situation where really there's never been anything particularly exciting in the fire industry. If you actually look across the board, everyone's kind of competing on a fairly level playing field. But from the point of view of introducing something that really genuinely makes a difference on the end to the end user, this ticks a lot of boxes. But I'd say in terms of the sort of key sectors at the moment that are deploying this, we'd look at healthcare is a huge one. Kind of comes under disruption again, because you've got so many clinically sensitive areas that just makes complete sense. And student accommodation is probably one of the big ones at the moment. We had a situation where a system was put into one of the London ones, I won't mention names, during commissioning. And bear in mind, this was actually during the commissioning of the swap out to self-test. One of the detectors did come up as masked. Sure enough, the site went to that bedroom where the student was, and a sock had been placed over the detector. So it's delivering what we're saying it's delivering. It's giving that kind of visibility to the end user that anybody that gets caught basically covering detectors, they're going to get caught out by it.
Yeah. We've got a new feature that enables that, Mark, haven't we, that is about to be released. Do you want to explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, so Duncan, do you want me to quickly explain that one, the new feature? Yeah,
it's great for me sitting here and listening to you two guys, and when you interact with each other, it just makes it. I'm just a visual listener, so
okay,
carry on, guys.
It's perfect. No, I mean, so again, at the moment, the sort of the initial setup was that the system would pick up a covered detector when the service and maintenance taking place, basically. But we're about to launch a new feature where we can periodically introduce a very small amount of smoke from the self-test device.
It's under the fire threshold, so it can't create a fire. Basically.
Yeah, correct. It's pre sort of effectively what would be the fire condition. But this can be done periodically. So in terms of making sure the building has not got issues in it, this ticks a lot of boxes. So it's kind of anti-masking, but whenever you want to check for anti-masking. Is that fair, Ben?
Yeah, so it's a perfect solution for. I mean, we've had prisons, we've had student services where they've said that they want to be able to check weekly that nobody's covering over the detectors because they're particularly, especially where they're sleeping risk, and they're wanting to check more often than say 4 times a year. I mean, based on the standards, you need to test once a year, but as Mark said, we cover this for testing 4 times a year because you can test the very largest of our systems in about an hour. Why don't you do it more often? Is our kind of call to action on this, and we don't charge any more for that. We just have that as part of standard, as part of the offering. That actually, I know that standards say one thing, but we're in the safety business. Why not ensure that it's say 4 times a year? But what Mark's just described is a solution where we can check for anti-masking more regularly because we're only burning a tiny quantity of gas which is under the fire threshold, so it doesn't trigger a fire. We can check far more regularly for anti-masking where there's a particular requirement to do that, just ensuring that we're getting rid of one of the main industry issues around cover detectors. It's a big thing that people are wanting to solve, and that's coming as an additional feature in about a month or two's time, on top of we're improving upon perfection, Duncan.
Yes, and what is great is when you look at the whole issue of cover detectors, and it's very hard to prove with a traditional detector that failed to pick up a fire because it was covered, to actually prove that it was covered in the first place, because 9 times out of 10 the detector and whatever was covering it would be damaged beyond recognition to be able to do that level of scrutiny. Whereas now, in terms of I'm just thinking from an induction perspective, from a user of a room or the custodian of a building, to say, don't try and outthink us, because this system will call you out. And in anybody that then chooses to try and second guess and outsmart it are only going to be falling foul of their own rules.
Exactly. Just to add to that, I mean, there are Reddit pages which are dedicated to defeating fire systems. So, I mean, this is something that people think about and do. Could be a nice revenue stream for universities, Mark, being able to find the students who are covering detectors.
But I was just going to add to that. If you actually also look, and we see this from our partners that we work with, if you see the amount of sites that are handed over and commissioned, and there are covers left on detectors when the system's new, because it's not spotted. They might be in a void or somewhere that's not visible or easy to get to. So the fact is, once you've commissioned this system, you will know straight away if any of the detectors are covered before it's handed over.
Well, it's one of the first. If I'm in a room full of fire engineers, and I'm talking about self-test, one of the very first things I say is, have you ever taken over a site, lifted a ceiling tile and looked at the void and seen streams of dust caps on the detectors? Everybody nods their head. They can all relate to it. We had a lift engineer in, and he suggested a scary number. He said he's been doing this job for years, and at least 5-6 times a year he's going into a lift shaft where the detector at the top has a dust cap on it. I mean, we should be scared of these kind of things, because you've got a perfectly functioning detector that could never ever work. So it's an industry issue, and we've found a way to address it, which we're very pleased to have, just from a safety perspective, quite apart from anything else.
Question from me at this point. You talked about a very small quantity of substance in there in the detector that is used for the self-test. What is the lifespan of that system for self-test? Does the head get replaced? I'm coming to you, Ben, for that.
Yeah, so it's a hydrocarbon. It's not going to go anywhere. I mean, it will outlast you and I by a long distance. I mean, it's wax, so it's not going to evaporate. It's not going to disappear. And we state that you can do 4 tests a year for the lifetime of the detector, and generally our guidance on that is around about 14 years. Between 10 and 14 years. So we put in our guidance that you can test 4 times a year on that quite easily for the lifetime of the detector. But in reality, it'll probably do a lot more. I mean, we've got some sat on benches that have done 300 tests. We're not suggesting it will do 300 tests because there's an environmental dependence on it. But we're entirely confident that it will do 4 tests a year for the lifetime of the detector. No problem at all.
Well, so that, like you say, a real game changer to detection within the industry. So, what's next for self-test? Where do we go from here?
Okay, so as Mark and I just discussed, there's a new release coming for self-test. It will have the capability of being able to test, do the anti-masking test more regularly because it uses a small amount of gas, and it's also under the fire threshold, allowing people to kind of be able to test that more often as a function. The other bit that we've brought in is not only do you need to test the detectors whilst you're going around testing the building, you need to be able to test the call points. So effectively, the way that we would do it today is that you'd functionally test all the detectors, go around, do the visual inspection, and then you'd have to put it into test mode and go around and test the call points. But what we've done is we've kind of built that into the process, and what we're keen to be able to do, one of the key functions of self-test is its capability to remain active whilst you're testing, because effectively it's automated. It knows it's testing device number 1, device number 2, device number 3. If device number 27 comes in, it knows it's an issue, so therefore it can actually say, we're not expecting that. So it shuts down the self-test and it can raise the alarm. So the ability to move away from that test mode, we've got a hybrid thing called service mode, which enables us to actually test, to have effectively, to all intents and purposes, an active system whilst you're testing, which is unique. I hold 20 patents on self-test around surrounding areas, not just on the self-test capability, but everything else around the visual inspection, everything else that is surrounded to it. And this is patented. It's filed to be patented, and it is unique. Nobody else can do it. If any other competitor that goes in has to do manual testing, they need to put the boiler into a test, put the panel into a test mode, and they need to isolate the system whilst they're going around testing. And if they have somebody back at the panel, which, Mark, doesn't always happen, does it? Let's be clear about, kind of cost pressures and time pressures and people pressures in a building. You don't always have somebody back at the panel to check the test files coming through, but it also depends on the person at the test panel ensuring that they're reading all the information coming through and getting it correct. And I know for a fact that has often gone wrong, because I've looked at commission systems where the labelling has been coming in through incorrect. You've had somebody back at the panel calling that it was correct, but were on their phone and not actually looking at what was going on. So with this capability of having it, actually the smart system where it's spotting stuff which is out of sequence, and effectively having a system which is active whilst you're testing it is really important. And what we wanted to incorporate with the call points when you're testing those is the capability of being able to isolate them just for a brief period. So actually, when you're going around the system, you can put in the address of the call point, isolate it, test test the core point, make sure it functions and that it's sending a test alarm, and then effectively just by resetting it, it then proves it's been testing, and you test it and you can put it back online. So we're reducing the amount of time that that these core points are isolated by a really significant period of time. So it's kind of more holistic system from that perspective.
We're trying to bring, aren't we, more into the automation part, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so,
just to kind of add to that, I mean, we've also got a purge function which enables us to be able to run the fan, which is useful from a couple of different perspectives. That if you've got smoke that's trapped in there because somebody's covered it, then you can actually push whatever's in there out and making sure that you can return it back to clean air. Another core function is actually the amount of time that the detector's offline. When we introduce smoke, we then get to the fire threshold level. Tick, it functionally passes, but then within about 10 seconds, we whir the fan and we return the detector back down to clean air. The reason why that's important is it's ready to be a detector again because we're not isolating the full system.
That's a huge deal, that one.
Yeah, huge difference, because, I mean, any fire engineer will tell you that they have to wait for 15, 20 minutes at the end of testing the smoke detectors before they can turn the fire panel back on, because they've got to wait for the smoke to dissipate. And if you've got a low airflow in the room, you're in danger of evacuating the building if there's still smoke inside the detector. So, that's, again, an issue that we've been able to get around. And then a couple of other bits that I kind of wanted to point to was actually this is going around Europe. We're launching with a sister brand over in Germany called ESSA, and we've been speaking to VDS, who are the big approval bodies there. We're working with them to be able to get self-test to be done remotely based on certain protocols being followed about the building owner being on site and being able to test it. And again, what that enables and what way the reason why they were encouraging of this, and we're looking at actually going down this path with VDS in Germany, is that they believe that it will encourage more testing. So you're not having to send a technician to site. You can do this remotely, get all the fault reports, find out any issues at any time during the year. And they thought, they're thinking on this so that it would lead to kind of that safe testing. Equally, I had a very interesting conversation with them about the kind of hierarchy of risk in building. Any building owner will talk to you about risks, and Mark will talk to you, with great insight about sites that he's been to where he's been waiting for ladder permits and everything else that comes across that you come across in terms of safety from a facilities perspective. And rightly so, these are very kind of arduous processes that you need to go through. And we're looking at the balance of risk of visual inspection of detectors in voids. This is just for Germany, not for any other region currently. And their view was that the balance of risk of sending a fire engineer up a ladder to pop a ceiling tile to see a detector that in a void that we know hasn't changed because the building owners confirmed that nothing's happened in the void in the previous year. B, that we know functionally works, and C, we know is not covered. But actually, the balance of risk of sending somebody up a kind of 3 meter ladder to go and peer through a ceiling tile and dislodge whatever is above there and having things fall on them potentially, the balance of risk was greater to that technician than actually the risk of actually looking at. Because the first thing that you do when you're looking at that kind of hierarchy of risk is the number one question to ask is, can you remove that risk? So that was their take on it. It's not relevant to any other region yet, but working down that route with Germany. So it'd be interesting to, I'd say, watch this space to see whether other people have that other kind of level of critical thinking about what this technology can bring along.
Can I add something very quickly, Ben?
Course, yeah.
So there are a number of end users in the UK who, once they've deployed this technology, they're very willing to look and say, if a permit hasn't been issued for a void for any works to be done, they're also very happy for there to be a variation that the visual inspection does not need to take place. And that's done very much on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. But if the disruption is too great and the risk is too great, as far as they're concerned, as long as the detector is proved to be in working order via self-test, they're willing to consider that. And that's quite new. It's quite a new way of thinking.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's one final point that I just want to kind of get across, Duncan, and that's really, I didn't know that, so that's really interesting to learn that people at sites are making their own independent decisions on the hierarchy of risk in that buildings. And all I can say is I concur, because it makes perfect sense to me. But I mean, equally, I just want to point out that the letter of the standard says visual inspection. So you just need to be clear on our position on this, and it's a site-by-site decision as to what they wish to do about it. And equally, what we found is that through especially things like the Bluetooth technology, we've just, I'm happy to announce, Mark, you may not know about this, but we've just got funding early this year to work on the next on development of self-test using the beaconing, which will enable us to be able to track people with disabilities around the building. So what we can use is periodically poll the Bluetooth beacon that can be associated with a receiving device on the person with a disability. And it means that in the event of an evacuation requirement, we can see precisely where the most vulnerable people are in the building and what they need in order to be able to safely evacuate the building. So a real game changer for, you're 2 times more likely to die and 3 times more likely to be injured in case of a fire if you're not able-bodied. So we're doing stuff over and above the required standards because we've got this technology and capability. And we're adding in other features to this as well, which could be quite nice, around the ability for them to be able to raise an alert and having a very precise location from the detector label as to where they're situated. So if they've had a trip or a fall, or even want to raise an alarm themselves, they can do that very safely and securely, knowing precisely where the location of the event is. And equally, we've been looking at putting, if you're a wheelchair user and you've got a heavy fire door closing on you, we can see whether people are the safe side of the door or the unsafe side of the door, and put up to a 3-minute delay on the dropping of the fire door to allow them to safely evacuate. And that has a day-to-day impact on people who are wheelchair users, because they need to be in buddy systems. I was talking at length with York University. It's the number one complaint about the fire system from teachers and staff who are wheelchair users, is that they have really restricted use of the building because they need to be in these buddy systems. And effectively, what this enables to do, because we can track them smartly, is it enables them to be able to self-evacuate. So a real big difference, not just in an event of emergency, but day to day, about their freedom of being able to move around the building. So we've done a fair bit of research into it, and so watch this space on other things. And I think things are occurring to us all the time about different things we can do. But there's some nice ideas in the pipeline, I'd say, Duncan. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And I think what is so refreshing is that rather than meeting a standard, you're pushing those boundaries, exceeding it. And what I'd like to be able to think is that the way that you're exceeding is that standards are going to be brought up to your level. And so it's about using that technology and innovation to deal with risk and address issues. And the disability one there is a great one. It enables a fire team searching for individuals to know exactly where they're going, rather than enter into a potentially random search pattern based on, we thought they were there last, rather than knowing exactly.
I think you've really kind of summarised something there that hits the nail on the head for me. I think it's beholden upon manufacturers and people who innovate in the fire space is not to think about the standards and work up to them, but think about safety and work up to that. So you actually set your own benchmark in terms of what you think is safe and what you can do to over and above meeting a required standard, because everybody can work up to a standard. That's fairly simple, but actually looking beyond that and putting your head above that standard and saying, what else can we do as Honeywell fire system providers to make our system providers is what is and has been make us stand out.
Yeah, and if you're looking from the person on the top of the club omnibus, if we're going to use such a phrase, is where can I get best value for my for my money, and I can go and I can meet the standard, but I can exceed that standard, which will give me all these additional benefits. And it's almost future proofing to the way that the standards will hopefully go to encompass the technology and innovation that's been put in place by Honeywell. One of the things I'd like to dip into now, from a layman, if you like, or a layperson, I'd like to know a little bit more how the self-test process actually works. I want the technology, and I want to know how it connects to the Life Safety Services app.
You want me to cover that, Ben?
Go for it, Mark.
It's my this is my area of expertise.
Excellent.
So basically, I will also say one thing: I've never had so much fun in my life selling fire systems. This is a great, fun product to sell, especially when you see people's faces when you show it to them. So I'll give you a very kind of high-level overview. So we connect a box similar size to an iPad, I would guess you'd say, next to the fire alarm panel. That basically takes all the information from every loop and every device. Now, assuming that this doesn't have to be exclusively connected to a system with self-test, but it's at its most powerful when it does. So you can just use this as a compliance tool to manage the service and maintenance, see faults, disablements, fires, all this kind of stuff remotely. So that's kind of like a separate subject.
So it's kind of gateway to the cloud.
It's a gateway to the cloud, yeah. I mean, this is basically connecting, making your building smart and accessible from anywhere. That's the overview of that. But the interesting part is the moment you put a self-test device on the loop, that information starts to go through to the cloud. So, quick scenario for you: an engineer will arrive at site. He will pair his mobile phone with that gateway. So there's a security protocol in place at this point. He pairs, and at that point, he enables control of the system through his phone. And this is all done, what Ben mentioned earlier, about putting the system into service mode. Main benefit being we never take the loops when they have fully self-test devices on them offline. The loop stays fully live. So your building and your risk is mitigated massively at this point. And at that point, preferably, the preferable situation is a service plan is already programmed in on the system. So the engineer knows when they get to that building, they're going to test the quarter, the half the system, the three-quarter, whatever it might be. And at that point, they initiate through the app to start self-test. Once they've pressed start, it's as simple as that. Every detector, one after another, in that test plan, starts testing itself. Multiple loops, multiple panels at the same time. So basically, it's so efficient when you actually see it happening. So yeah, so that part is the main process-led part of the exercise. Whilst the engineer has now, at this point, he's just left the system to test itself. Bear in mind, we're just talking about the detectors at this point. So at this point, he's walking around, you activate the Bluetooth through the app, and every device, the device he gets closest to, will appear at the top of the list. So he knows exactly which detector he's under. He can, at this stage, check the label. If the label is incorrect, he can even relabel the device through the app. So this can be done. The olden days of having to go back to the panel, get your laptop out, get your bit of paper that you've written what needs to change and do that, that's forget it now. All you need to do is back the panel up at the end before you leave. So this is all done through the cloud now. The cloud is controlling the whole process from start to finish.
The final step, I guess, Mark, is that once you're done, you download the report.
Hit end test, and the report is automatically generated. So when we talk about automating the process, this is the part I love. You do not have to get anywhere near a pen and paper anymore. The whole process is fully automated.
And then it's got to be sent back to the office to be compiled into a report, sent to the end user. I've even seen people put sticky dots on detectors to confirm that they've tested it in a certain year.
Still happens.
Oh my gosh. There's some really interesting ways that I've seen people to kind of prove compliance. But this, as Mark said, you prove that you're functionally tested, that it's not masked, that you've completed your visual inspection, that equally, and I just want to emphasize the point about being able to check the label, because currently, unless you've got somebody, relaying back what label is appearing on the panel, you don't know whether that label is good or bad. You think about any building that we use in the modern era, it continually changes. Ben's office might become, Mike's kitchen, whatever it might be. But that is the difference between what appears on the panel when the first responders come and whether they're going to the right area or the wrong area. A great example is, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's a film on Netflix about Notre Dame, and terrible film, but it's a great opening sequence. It's it's quite an awful opening sequence, but it shows what can go wrong when you've got a bad label. The label had come down to the panel, they deciphered it incorrectly, they sent somebody off to investigate in the wrong part of the roof. Meanwhile, the fire had caught on the other end of the roof and they'd gone to the wrong place. That's the difference about actually labelling something up correctly or not.
But this, Ben, this also leads on to what we said earlier about the engineer is not just standing under a detector testing it.
Yes.
The engineer is able to actually check that it's labelled accurately because the concentration is there to use the automation part of the process.
Yeah. So we can absolutely stay on top of the labelling, which is, anybody will tell you is it's sometimes when people take over a site, it's actually a chargeable process, isn't it, quite often, to go around and relabel the system because it's quite a labour intensive process, because you've got to have somebody relaying what the label is, or they've got to print it off and match it up and make sure it's correct. Whereas this, it's you stand underneath it and it's as quick as you can type on your mobile to relabel it, and then pops off to the cloud and then uploads the panel inventory, and away you go. It's as simple as that.
We talk about efficiency all the time, but this whole process, this is all about efficiency. That's all it comes down to ultimately. Remove disruption, make the whole process efficient, and that's what we're doing.
And I think it's doing what it says on the tin. It's that common sense approach to fire and life safety, and it can draw us back to the beginning. The title of the podcast, Revolutionising Fire Safety with Honeywell Self-Test. Well, I think that what we've got I know what we've got here is a system that has been developed using knowledge and understanding from the past, bringing in technology that we're seeing today in vapes, and cross-pollinating, if you like that phrase, to use that technology into fire and life safety. And it's been hugely beneficial to me to sit here and listen, and it's great to see that energy and the excitement between you two guys chatting and talking together. And I think that this will be the first of a number of chats that we have to look how that progress goes and that journey materializes. And Mark, there's going to be a lot of new examples that you can give where it goes into more and more different building demographics. And let's not forget, this is all about maintaining life and fire safety, and this is the whole reason we're passionate about the industry that we work in. Gentlemen, thank you from me, and all that's left for me to say is my name's Duncan White. I'm the managing editor of the International Fire and Safety Journal, and I've had the absolute pleasure today to be talking to Ben Wolfe and Mark Hunter from Honeywell. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.